Welcome to the land of history. Like, comment, subscribe to our channel, and share our work to your friends to watch. As winter's icy hold tightened across Europe in the closing days of 1944, the continent's thunderous clashes began to subside. Following their remarkable surge out of Normandy, Allied forces had settled near the edge of Germany. The Wehrmacht, battered and dispirited like a defeated predator, struggled to regain its footing. For the Allies, victory in Europe seemed imminent, merely a matter of time. Yet one man's wrath remained a wild card: Adolf Hitler. Ignoring his advisors' pleas to rally his troops for Germany's defense, the dictator instead resolved to unleash one final catastrophic German assault in the war. On December 15th, Allied soldiers, unsuspecting and unprepared, were about to be blindsided. Just a day before, Bernard Montgomery, commander of the 21st Army Group, had confidently asserted that Germany's shortages in men, material, and supplies made any offensive impossible. Young Allied troops, lulled into complacency, were about to see their sense of safety shattered. With the force of a sudden tempest, a concealed German army was poised to strike at the U.S. lines. The sheer scale and power of this force would seem almost supernatural, as if conjured from nowhere. This renewed blitzkrieg would be merciless, and the formidable German bulge it created would engulf the Ardennes as American defenses crumbled. Yet in the midst of the turmoil, a symbol of resistance emerged. Deep in Belgium's frozen Lanzerath Ridge, Lyle Book Jr. and his group of 18 men stood their ground. These resolute American soldiers would be tasked with holding off an entire battalion of more than 500 German troops. Should they succeed, their stand could unravel Hitler's entire scheme, sending shockwaves through the remainder of the conflict. After the devastating German loss at Stalingrad on February 2, 1943, the Soviet advance seemed unstoppable. The Red Army, seemingly inexhaustible and driven by vengeance, pressed forward relentlessly. By late 1944, Hitler had to admit that Berlin would soon fall to the Soviet juggernaut unless he could somehow shift German forces from the Western Front to defend the East. But the Western situation was hardly less desperate. The powerful Allied army stood at Germany's threshold, having executed a brilliant breakout from Normandy. Yet in Hitler's mind, these forces were more vulnerable to division than the unified Soviet army. He believed the alliance between Britain and America was fragile, and that a single, decisive strike could break their unity and force the U.S. to negotiate for peace. This would allow Germany to concentrate its remaining strength against the Soviets. But the odds were grim. Germany's strategic reserves were depleted, manpower was running out, and equipment was worn and scarce, making a sudden offensive a daunting gamble. It would require the absolute commitment of every German soldier left in the West. The plan was straightforward. Hitler would revive the tactics that had brought him victory 4 years earlier, launching a swift attack through the Ardennes with his elite 6th Panzer Army. The German offensive would smash through U.S. lines in the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River, and seize Antwerp, splitting the Allied front and forcing them into a predicament reminiscent of Dunkirk. The outcome balanced on a knife's edge. The Germans might inflict a demoralizing defeat on the Allies, compelling them to reconsider their resolve. Alternatively, they could squander what remained of the Wehrmacht's strength, leaving Germany open to an unstoppable Allied invasion. Hitler did not hesitate or consider a defensive strategy. He committed everything to the bold Ardennes attack. History would remember it as the Battle of the Bulge. Surprise was essential for the offensive's success. The Allies had to be convinced that Germany was incapable of mounting an attack. To this end, the German military quietly mobilized hundreds of thousands of troops, moving them through the forests under cover of night. By daylight, they hid in villages and towns, concealing vehicles in barns or camouflaging them with branches. Allied reconnaissance planes scouring the terrain would find no sign of a massing enemy. Most German soldiers had no idea they were part of a top-secret operation. Even regimental commanders were kept in the dark until the last moment. Only the highest ranks of German command knew the full plan, and even then, many senior officers urged Hitler to focus on defending Germany itself. By this stage, however, Hitler had long since stopped heeding his generals and dismissed their warnings. As the main attack force gathered in secrecy, Otto Skorzeny, SS Commando, and the mastermind behind Mussolini's rescue the previous year, led a covert team behind enemy lines, disguised as Allied troops in Operation Greif. These English-speaking German agents wreaked havoc, sabotaging supply routes, communications, and road signs, misleading traffic, and spreading confusion in the crucial hours before the assault. They even managed to send an entire Allied regiment astray. At the same time, another elite unit undertook Operation Stosse, a bold nighttime parachute drop behind Allied lines aimed at seizing a crucial road intersection near Malmedy, Belgium. The secrecy surrounding the German troop movements worked remarkably well, lulling the Allies into complacency, and they failed to piece together the true nature of the German special operations. This rapid mobilization, under already strained circumstances, stretched the Wehrmacht's supply chains to their limits. But it was a gamble that could not wait. As German troops, both those hidden within Allied territory and those massing beyond, prepared for the coming assault, the American and British soldiers remained blissfully unaware of the looming disaster. On December 16, 1944, at dawn, the German military received the order to launch what they hoped would be their last crushing blitzkrieg in Europe. In the early morning darkness, the dreaded 6th Panzer Army, led by the notorious Sepp Dietrich, struck U.S. positions with a ferocity and surprise that left the Allies reeling. The attack caught countless American soldiers off guard, many still in their sleeping quarters, scrambling for their weapons as German armor swept through their camps. Contrary to Hitler's directive for a massive opening artillery barrage, Hasso von Manteuffel and the 5th Panzer Army chose a more covert approach, crossing the Sauer River in silence to catch the Americans unaware. The sudden and savage assault threw many inexperienced U.S. troops into chaos. Some broke ranks and fled in terror, while others were reportedly paralyzed by fear. In a matter of moments, the front lines in the Ardennes had become a scene of utter confusion and horror for the unprepared Allied forces. The Germans quickly notched a series of victories, overrunning Allied positions and pushing deep into French and Belgian territory. Their rapid advance, nearly 60 miles in just a few days, created the infamous bulge in the Allied lines, marking the beginning of a grueling and desperate battle for everyone involved. However, not every Allied soldier was new to combat, and not all gave in to panic. Amid the destruction, a handful of American troops displayed remarkable bravery and steadfastness. In the coming hours, their acts of heroism and resolve would secure them a lasting place in military history. The 18 members of the 394th Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon were a select, though relatively green group, assigned to the hazardous Ardennes region. Among their ranks were college-educated alumni of the now-defunct Army Specialized Training Program, which had prepared future officers in fields like engineering, languages, and medicine. Their leader was Lieutenant Lyle Buck, a prodigious 20-year-old and one of the youngest officers in the Army. The platoon, divided into two 9-man reconnaissance squads, was highly skilled in surveillance, but not equipped for direct combat with German forces. Their chief responsibility was to function as an intelligence-gathering unit, identifying enemy positions and strength, and relaying this information to regimental intelligence. They operated patrol vehicles, manned observation posts, and coordinated intelligence for the regiment. Stationed in a brick structure in Huningen, Belgium, near the German frontier, they used the building's basement to store military rations. On the pivotal morning of December 16th, the two squads observed a significant German buildup in a nearby town. The Americans soon found themselves isolated, with communications to higher command disrupted and no reinforcements in sight. At the time, most U.S. forces in the vicinity were engaged in attacking the Siegfried Line at Wallerschild, just 5 miles north of the platoon's location. Although they had anticipated some form of counterattack, the overwhelming size of the German force surpassed anything they could have imagined. Earlier intelligence had painted the Wehrmacht as a spent force. As the massive German columns advanced, the American soldiers were baffled by the sudden appearance of such large enemy formations. Undeterred, Lieutenant Buch and his men decided to fortify their position at Lanzerath, atop a hill on the forest's edge, overlooking a broad pasture. Making use of old foxholes left by previous troops, they deepened and expanded the defenses to accommodate more men. Hidden beneath pine logs, their position controlled a 300-yard stretch of the ridge to the northeast. This vantage point gave them a clear view of a fork in the road to their left. As snow blanketed the landscape, the Americans blended seamlessly into their environment, invisible to enemy scouts below. They used a nearby log cabin as a warming hut and, thanks to Buch's resourcefulness, were well armed with extra carbines, automatic rifles, and a light machine gun. A .50 caliber machine gun mounted on a Jeep, also acquired through Buch's ingenuity, rounded out their formidable arsenal. The platoon positioned the Jeep for maximum advantage over the road. With hourly patrols to maintain contact with neighboring units and monitor enemy activity, this group, originally intended to serve as the regiment's eyes and ears, was thrust into a frontline role for which they were scarcely prepared. Their new and only mission was to hold their ground no matter what, hoping desperately for reinforcements. Buch would later recall in an interview, "We weren't trained to hold a defensive front. Our training was in reconnaissance and gathering enemy intelligence. But now they would have to exceed their training." As the Americans steeled themselves for the attack, across the battlefield, the German 9th Regiment readied to fulfill its objective: to lead the 6th Panzer Army's advance by storming Lanzerath and destroying the village. German commanders decided to reserve their armored vehicles for more critical engagements ahead. They believed the infantry of the 9th Regiment would be more than sufficient to capture the small village and eliminate any isolated American units nearby. By this stage of the war, most German formations were a mix of battle-hardened veterans and numerous young recruits with little experience handling weapons. During the Normandy invasion, the German 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, once renowned for its combat prowess, had suffered devastating losses. Rebuilt with personnel from Luftwaffe field regiments to bolster German morale, this reconstituted 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division was outfitted with the advanced STG-44 selective fire rifles, rifle grenades, and a variety of other weapons. Despite their fresh status, these recruits, influenced by relentless Nazi propaganda, believed that American soldiers were demoralized and unlikely to resist fiercely. From this division, the 9th Regiment was assigned the crucial task of leading the assault on Lanzerath and clearing the village. Their mission would continue with attacks on the nearby towns of Hansfeld and Bullingen, where they expected to encounter the main body of U.S. forces. Following the capture of Lanzerath, Kampfgruppe Peiper and the 6th Panzer Army were to advance swiftly along the Lossheimer Graben route. Though Germany had suffered heavy losses and was being pressed hard on two fronts, the morale among these German troops remained robust. They viewed themselves as the final bastion defending their homeland and were ready to fight fiercely to protect it. Letters sent home by these soldiers revealed a surprising optimism and resolve. They believed their advance was unstoppable and that victory was within reach. Moving through dense forests, the 500 men of the 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment and 50 soldiers from the Fusilier Regiment marched forward, completely unaware of the small American platoon poised to make their advance a nightmare. As the 9th Regiment approached the outnumbered American unit, they were conscious of the massive force trailing behind them. Over 500,000 troops, 1,400 tanks, and 2,400 aircraft were mobilizing to unleash the Third Reich's final fury. Many German soldiers had not witnessed such a large-scale offensive in years. They were intoxicated by the belief that this was their chance to turn the tide and realize the dream of the Thousand-Year Reich. What they did not anticipate was being thwarted by fewer than 24 American defenders. The ominous rumble of a 2-hour rolling artillery barrage marked the start of the assault. Huddled in their foxholes, the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon braced for impact, teeth clenched as the ground shook beneath them. Miraculously, their foxholes provided enough protection for most to emerge unscathed. But their relief was brief. They soon discovered that German forces had severed their landlines, isolating them completely. Desperate for direction, the platoon radioed their regiment, receiving orders to hold their ground and dispatch a patrol. As the patrol cautiously moved through the devastated terrain, they witnessed a massive German infantry formation advancing under the glare of powerful searchlights near Losheim. At dawn, Lieutenant Boek spotted a long column of roughly 500 German soldiers marching toward them. 18 men against 500. It was a staggering imbalance. Boek requested permission from regimental command to withdraw and conduct a delaying action, but was ordered to maintain their position at all costs and await reinforcements from the 3rd Battalion. As German troops pressed forward, Boek deployed some men to various defensive and observation posts. Skirmishes erupted around the village, with American soldiers engaging in close-quarters combat against the advancing enemy. The German troops, though passionate, were largely inexperienced and overconfident, a reckless zeal that would soon cost them dearly. In one notable episode, American soldier Krager single-handedly took out most of a German platoon using the .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the Jeep. From their ridgetop position, Boek and his platoon prepared to ambush the advancing Germans. However, a young village girl inadvertently alerted the enemy to their presence. The Germans immediately sought cover, and a fierce firefight erupted between the outnumbered Americans and the advancing infantry. Exposed and heavily outgunned, the Americans dug into their reinforced defenses, relying on their experience and well-rehearsed tactics. As the freezing battle escalated into a relentless hail of bullets, the Americans were struck by the Germans' inexperienced tactics, charging headlong and clustering in the open. Some later likened it to, quote, shooting clay ducks at an amusement park in California. Several Germans were cut down attempting to scale the 4-foot-high barbed wire fence dividing the field. Casualties mounted, littering the snow with fallen soldiers. The Americans allowed German medics to retrieve the wounded under a white flag, but resumed firing when suspicious activity was detected. Throughout the day, the platoon tenaciously defended their position, inflicting humiliating losses on the enemy. The deep foxholes and fresh snowfall rendered their location nearly invisible. Though the Germans knew where the fire originated, they could not effectively retaliate. Lieutenant Boek was resolved to fight to the last bullet, even as the looming threat of the 1st SS Panzer Division grew. Yet, relentless enemy fire eventually destroyed the platoon's radio, severing their final link to command. As dusk settled over the frozen Ardennes forests, with ammunition dwindling and no contact with headquarters, the Americans realized they might not survive Lanzerath Ridge. Gradually, the Germans adapted their tactics, shifting from frontal assaults to flanking maneuvers along roadside ditches, rifles trained on the American foxholes. The air thundered with gunfire as both sides exchanged volleys. Each American shot heightened the defenders' anxiety as their supplies waned. The Germans launched wave after wave of attacks, growing increasingly frustrated as the snow-covered American platoon remained virtually invisible. Despite overwhelming numbers, the Americans' superior defensive position wreaked havoc on the Fallschirmjäger Regiment. The intense firefight between the 18 American soldiers and the vastly larger force of over 500 Germans raged relentlessly for hours. They repelled 3 major assaults as smoke thickened the air and the acrid scent of gunpowder spread across the battlefield. After the third wave was driven back, hundreds of German soldiers lay scattered across the grimy snow. Meanwhile, only a single American had been wounded. Despite their remarkable success, the platoon understood they could not hold out indefinitely. As Buch later told the New York Times, "We were scared and exhausted, trapped in a hellish nightmare. It felt endless. No help was coming. It seemed hopeless." Frozen, fatigued, and dangerously low on ammunition, Lieutenant Buch desperately sought reinforcements or an order to withdraw. Yet, just as he prepared to signal a retreat, the Germans outmaneuvered the small American unit by flanking them, breaking through their lines, and overrunning their foxholes. Even in victory, German casualties continued. As they took control of the ridge, several attackers were killed by grenades rigged on wires, triggered by hidden American defenders. Unexpectedly, the Germans did not execute the captured soldiers immediately. Instead, a German officer dragged Buch from his position, machine gun in hand. Surely there were many more American troops nearby, and the Germans demanded to know their location. With no answers, Buch feared for his life when the officer pressed the gun to his back and pulled the trigger. Miraculously, the weapon clicked empty. At that moment, bullets struck both men. The German officer was badly wounded, while Buch sustained a calf injury. German Sergeant Vince Kuhlbach took charge, seizing Buch and asking who commanded the defense. When Buch identified himself, Kuhlbach was incredulous that such a young man had led the defense with only 18 men. As they were taken prisoner, Buch had no idea what they had accomplished. At the time, their capture felt like a devastating loss, and Buch blamed himself bitterly for not ordering a retreat sooner to save his men. Their fate was as bleak as their final stand on Lanzerath Ridge. The able-bodied prisoners were sent to Germany, while the seriously wounded were loaded onto trucks and later transported by train. Buch was crammed into a single cattle car with 71 other POWs, traveling for days without food or water. By Christmas, 7 men in the car had died, and the rest clung to life by a thread. The prisoners were eventually taken to hospitals in Frankfurt and Hanover before being confined to a POW camp. When Task Force Baum from Patton's 4th Armored Division attempted to liberate the camp, Captain A. Baum was shocked by the number of prisoners and unable to free them all. Most of Baum's unit was captured during the attempt, and Buch was recaptured, only to be released a week before the war's end. Weak, drained, and near delirium after enduring so much hardship, Buch required months of hospitalization after the war. Even then, he doubted that his men had done anything extraordinary. He reflected, "We were in those foxholes, defending ourselves and trying to survive." But as years passed and the final chapters of World War II were examined, Buch came to understand the true significance of their actions that day. He learned that they had held back an entire element of the 1st Battalion, 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, about 500 men. By doing so, this tiny American force disrupted the 6th Panzer Army's advance toward Antwerp, altering the course of one of the war's most critical and prolonged battles. At 4:30 a.m. on December 17th, more than 18 hours behind schedule, the 1st SS Panzer Division finally departed Lanzerath and moved northwest toward Buchholz Station. The entire German timetable for the advance on the Meuse River and Antwerp had been severely delayed, granting the Americans precious hours to bring in reinforcements. This delay proved vital to the Battle of the Bulge's outcome, allowing the Allies time to regroup and counterattack. Recognition for their valor took years, but every veteran from Lanzerath Ridge was eventually awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. 4 received the Distinguished Service Cross, 5 the Silver Star, and 9 the Bronze Star with V device for their 10-hour ordeal against a 500-strong German battalion. Their names are forever etched in history, and Buch's platoon remains the most decorated unit of its size in all of World War II. As we reflect on the extraordinary courage of Lieutenant Lyle Buch and his 17 comrades who stood firm against overwhelming odds and changed the course of history, we must ask ourselves, What lessons can we draw from their unwavering resolve in the face of adversity? How might their story inspire us to confront our own challenges with the same grit and determination? If their bravery moved you, imagine the impact of sharing this story with others, keeping alive the memory of those who fought so fiercely for freedom. So, will you join us in honoring their legacy by liking this content and sharing it with your community? Together, we can ensure these remarkable heroes are never forgotten. What part of their story resonated most with you? Let us know in the comments below.